grew up in Las Vegas, graduated from Valley High School in Vegas, actually enrolled at the University of Nevada in Reno, but never got a chance to attend college because in September of that year I won Miss Rodeo Nevada, and then in November of that year won Miss Rodeo America, and then the rest is history. So I've achieved what I've done through the School of Hard Knocks rather than through the educational system. Our upbringing and our relationship with horses had many things that really helped us. One being 4-H. Obviously, the horses, talk about life going full circle. Our horses were trained to pull a wagon. There was this casino going to open in Las Vegas. It was called Vegas World or Vegas Land, and they had 2 horses pulling a wagon up and down the strip, and it was advertising Vegas Land is coming. But it never got funded. You know how they have all the theme hotels? It was just a little bit before its time. But my mother had made friends. She was very gregarious, made friends with everybody, and she had made friends with the people that drove the wagon up and down the strip. And when the project didn't take off and they were headed back to Missouri, she bought those 2 horses. One's name was Rebel and one's name was Rio. They were both Palominos. They were a matched pair that pulled the wagon. I don't know that they had ever been ridden before for pleasure. She brought them home. She paid $300 a piece for them, brought them home. That first night, they stayed tied to a railroad tie in our backyard because we didn't have a corral, but we had 5 acres. The next day, my dad was out digging post holes in the caliche in Las Vegas to make their corrals. And I mean, this is a true story that just sounds like it's something out of a book. And we didn't have a saddle. About 5 or 6 months later, my aunt, who lived in California, in Tehachapi, California, who had a ranch, had an old saddle that she gave us, and my sister and I shared it. And then some other kids that we went to school with that you probably know, the Rays, Bob Ray from Las Vegas, and they had some daughters, Jackie Ray, and I can't remember the other ones, but there's a Jackie and a Tappy, and anyway, they went to Gymkhana's, and so they said, well, we'll take you to this Gymkhana. It was $1 an event to enter, and there was 25 events, and we would enter every event, my sister and I. Probably a 10 and 8 by that time. And we had to switch saddles. When I would come out of the arena, I would switch the saddle to her horse, and she would go in. So we've got some fabulous photos of us in the potato race and the egg race and barrel racing, and really not knowing anything. But they would come by in their 3-horse van. It was a side-by-side van where you walked them up the ramp. No horse trailer or anything. Went right up in the back of the pickup. And they'd come and take us to the Gymkhanas and bring us home. And then as a result of that, we entered 4-H, which really taught us how to care for our animals. Later, when I was in high school, I worked for a man named Dean Schindel, and Dean was very instrumental in helping a lot of cowboys in Las Vegas and Southern California. And after school, I rode horses and exercised them, and that's how I got involved in the Miss Rodeo America pageant, because they had the horsemanship there at his ranch. Okay. Well, I'm a 16, 17-year-old kind of know-it-all cowgirl that thought this queen stuff was a little bit sissy. And the girls had to tie goats in the Miss Rodeo America pageant, and some of them would come to the pageant and not know how to tie goats. Well, by this time, I had gone on to, from the Gymkhanas to junior and high school rodeo, and was the Nevada high school barrel racing champion, goat tied, calf roped, and everything. And I thought it was just ridiculous that somebody would try to be a rodeo queen and not know how to tie a goat. So I'm at the barn jacking my jaws one day and said, can you believe these girls don't know how to tie goats? And Mr. Schindel says, if you think it's so easy, why don't you enter a pageant? So on a dare that following year, I entered the Miss Eldorado pageant, and I made my own suit. I used to sew my own clothes, and I made my only suit that I wore in the pageant, and I won. Wow. But I mean, I obviously could speak. I was, a very good horsewoman. I didn't know anything about modeling. My appearance was au naturel. And when they asked us to take off our suits for the modeling, I thought they wanted to see my championship buckle. I didn't realize that there was a proper way to take off your jacket and fold it and everything. So as a result of that, this lady who was one of the judges in the pageant, her name was Judy Morio, and she had a modeling agency called Universal Models. And she said, if you're going to do any good at the Miss Rodeo Nevada pageant, we've got about 3 months to put some polish on you. And she actually taught me, my photographs going into the Miss Rodeo Nevada pageant were outstanding, and that's a big part of it. You know, the judges take home your photos back to their rooms when they're judging things, and they may not remember who you are. So I had fantastic photos. She taught me how to model, polished up my public speaking, and then my horsemanship was okay. And at the Miss Rodeo Nevada pageant, which was 4 months after Miss Eldorado, I won horsemanship and personality and won Miss Rodeo Nevada.
Nice.
So those two people, Dean Schindel and Judy Morio, are probably the two that helped me on the way. I remember flying into towns. I worked primarily with Cotton Rosser. Cotton is the P.T. Barnum of rodeo, and he really saw the value of having Miss Rodeo America as a PR tool. In fact, he used me so much, and I'm sure other Miss Rodeo Americas after me, more so in advance of the rodeo. I mean, he was smart about promotions. He knew that it wasn't just about making that lap around the arena and waving to the crowd. It was about getting people there, getting butts in the seats. And so I would go into town usually on a Tuesday and do newspaper, radio, sometimes television interviews to get tickets sold. And if, oh, by the way, I'm still there on the weekend, fine and dandy, you know, I would take my little introduction lap around the arena. But to Cotton Rosser, that wasn't the most important part of Miss Rodeo America. The most important part was helping it sell tickets.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My first show was in 1976. It was the Wrigley's Big Red Rodeo. Wrigley's Chewing Gum had a campaign with their Big Red Gum.
And that's in Chicago.
Well, Wrigley's is in Chicago, but they had the rodeo in Chandler, which was my hometown.
Okay, Chandler, Arizona. Okay.
And I don't know why they chose Chandler. Maybe Dale Smith was president then, and he lived there. I don't know, but that would, you know, make sense. But they had Larry Mahan and Donnie Gay doing the commentary, and Larry was going to do the interviews as well. And on the run-through day, the day before, it would be like Michael Jordan interviewing high school basketball players. You know, Larry at that time had just won, you know, his 6th world championship. He was and still is the king of the Cowboys. Mm-hmm. And for him to ask a guy, you know, what'd you think of your ride? They would be like, Mr. Mahan, what do you think about it? You know, and it was quite intimidating, actually. And so, being that I lived in Chandler at the time, and that I had a good relationship with the RCA and the PRCA, they said, can you do these interviews? Well, like I told you, my mom said there is no such thing as can't. Mm-hmm. And you know, when you know the sport and you know that cowboys love telling re-ride stories, mm-hmm. all you got to do is open the door and it's going to come. And that first rodeo in 1976 was the first one that I did, and it was live on CBS. Uh-huh. There is no going back. There is no take two. Mm-hmm. Then after that, there was kind of a little lull, and then in 1978, a company called Blair Pro Rodeo came with the idea to televise some rodeos, and they were syndicated mostly on NBC affiliates. But Bob Eubanks, Kurt Gowdy, Bob Tallman, Larry Mahan, and myself were all part of the team. Mm-hmm. First rodeo that I did with them was the Reno Rodeo. And I can remember Kurt Gowdy, of course, was an icon in sportscasting. Yeah. But he came with his hat that he had packed in his suitcase and feathers all around the brim, and we convinced him that we might need to reshape it. But Larry Mahan, Bob Tallman, and Kurt and I did that one, and then after that, Bob Eubanks joined the team. Uh-huh. But we did 78, 79, and 1980. Then in 1980, a little network came on the air called ESPN, and everybody was convinced that there was no way that ESPN could fill 24 hours of sports programming. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they did a lot of what they called junk sports, and unfortunately, or fortunately, rodeo fell into that category. So they were doing more and more rodeos, and we would televise 10 or 12 a year, 80, 81, 82. Looking back 25, 26 years later in the history of ESPN, I think there's now 4 ESPN networks with 24-hour sports and news on them, you know. But at the time, nobody was convinced that they could fill 24 hours of sports programming. But that was good for rodeo because it exposed rodeo to a sports audience that they wouldn't have ever gotten otherwise.